Beth, you are so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you as my guest today. Do you want to give people a little bit of flavour about your background and how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here and to talk with you. I have such a circuitous path that actually got out ahead of me, and I didn't intend to be doing what I'm doing, but I found myself here just in a lifelong journey of trying to understand the very confusing nature of humans and a formal education and training and professional career as a therapist. um, and I did clinical work as a therapist and was teaching for many years. And alongside that work, I was also my whole life pursuing relationships and experiences with my animals, particularly my dogs and horses, and really built a whole life with them and around them. And I pursued a lot of my own education and mentorship in that world. I have border collies. I do sheep herding with them, and I've had horses for a very long time, and just they've been central to my life. So many of my lessons about relationships and about myself came through that world and I looked to mentors and experiences who would help me look at my own role as a partner to my animals. And so those two paths ran side by side. And I think it's like long paths where you don't know they're going to meet. You can't see that they're headed in that direction for a long time, but they collided about 10 years ago. I knew that I was interested in equine therapy, but what I didn't know was that it needed to break out of the therapy mold, and that I wanted to reach people in a broader way, and that there was a lot about the mental health model that was going to be constricting for me. And so I did start working with clients with my animals, and then I was asked to do a work group, a team with my horses, and it was like something happened in that experience that changed me and changed the way that I looked at working with people. I always believed in the power of groups, but I didn't realize just how much the workplace was needing this kind of work. And so I dove into the deep end and started this journey of, and it's just really just kind of blown up in a beautiful way from there.
Yeah. And what happened during that session, that first session that you tried with kind of a work group?
Well, I realized that people had never talked about their relationships.
Okay.
I realized that I saw people starting to get in touch with themselves. The horses are these incredible leadership coaches, and they don't want to do anything with us unless we're showing up very whole and authentically who we are. And they just won't follow unstable leadership. They won't join unstable leadership. And our instability, it may be like a whole life problem where we just can't get stable in our whole lives. But oftentimes it's just a moment. And it's when we're confused inside, or our ideas are conflicting with our feelings, or there's something going on inside of us that we're not aware of, that we have to clear up and become congruent. And when that's happening, they give us feedback and show us that they're confused. And so what I saw was a lot of high level leaders in states of confusion. And I saw the horses showing them that. And it did not take much coaching for that to clear up. And then I saw the people change, and I saw the horses change. And then I saw a new kind of group emerge, which was like, oh, so I am showing up at work. I don't even know I'm not okay. No one knows I'm not okay. I feel alone and isolated, and we're just going about our tactical business. But meanwhile, the culture below the surface, our own leadership and the way we're doing our relationships, is muddy and cloudy and murky. And then when pressure enters our system in whatever way, it becomes turbulent, and that cloudiness actually gets stormy. And so I realized, I don't mind working with groups that aren't workplace teams, but I did realize there was a huge need for a deeper kind of work.
Yeah.
For people as leaders to really be developing themselves as whole beings, and teams to be looking at a team as a community instead of a team. And so, I that was really the aha moment with that. It was, I just watched all the lights come on, and I watched people who looked a little robotic and kind of on autopilot with themselves and each other. I watched them come to life. And it was an incredibly moving experience for me. And I realized there was no way I couldn't do that work without the animals.
Yeah.
And because it was so fast and honest and gentle, but direct, the feedback they were getting, and the change was so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's an incredible story. So you mentioned about people being kind of a little bit robotic and on autopilot. What are the other issues that you see or that you have seen with the leaders that you've worked with, that, how are they showing up? And is it that they're not showing up kind of as human in the workplace? They're kind of checking themselves at the door, essentially. Is that what it's
Absolutely. About? Yeah. We check our animal body at the door in a lot of places in our lives. And what that means is that our body is sending us all these signals about what's happening within and around us, and we're ignoring them.
Yeah.
And it's sending us signals about pressure, and it's trying to tell us to make little adjustments so that we can be in a state of ease and we can conserve energy. And I learned this from the animals. I'm not making this up. So this is the way animals live. This is mammal life. And we check that at the door because we're very distracted by our thinking and our talking.
Yeah.
And we get pulled into tactical behaviors, doing things and relating, and then we're really checked out from our own bodies. So what happens is, like, at the most basic thing I can say about it is that we don't hear our own needs, and therefore we don't attend to them, or we hear them and we debate or negotiate with our own needs and make a decision not to meet those needs. Okay. So if we do that, then we're not fully present. So a mammal that's not meeting their own needs is not able to really be present because you're impaired. And so what that looks like is we're carrying these pressures around, which become tensions, stresses, and then they kind of go into a traumatic state where we get flooded and overwhelmed, and we either blow up and go after others, implode and go after ourselves, start attacking ourselves, or we go numb. And so that would be the autopilot version, which we kind of go into this state of numbness because we're carrying so much pressure that our system will just dull the sensitivity. And in doing so, it kills our creativity, it kills our empathy system. We're really less aware of what's going on around us. So we're less responsive. And so there's huge impact there. And and that's really where, if you're not working on and maintaining ease, we're moving toward dis-ease, which then becomes disease. And so that's kind of the trajectory of mental health problems, because we end up, a mammal that gets flooded all the time is carrying around a lot of stress injury to your body.
Yeah. And Beth, when you're talking about needs, so this is something I talk about a lot on the podcast, and I'm referring to psychological needs and people's, we have 3 basic psychological needs that need to be met. Are you talking specifically about physical needs? Are they emotional needs, psychological needs, or kind of all needs?
Well, psychological needs are physical needs, because if we don't feel psychologically safe, we're having a biological experience about it. Okay. And so it's hard to separate the two. but people really like to, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I like them to like, can we hold hands?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because they really are very interconnected. But it's both. And our psychology informs our physiology, and our physiology informs our psychology. So mental health is physical health, and psychological safety in a group impacts our physical health. And our body is a signal system around both. So it's both for sure. Once we establish physical safety, I kind of joke, like, once we're in a new group setting and we take murder off the table, we just want to figure out whether we belong.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether we're going to be able to get our needs met,
Yeah.
both physically and emotionally, in that group. And that's really at the heart of psychological safety. If I have a need, is it safe for me to communicate it? And will it be attended to, or will I be allowed to attend to it for myself? And so that's where the tie is to the physical part. Because, like, as an example, if I'm in a meeting and there's a culture of rigidity that, like, where you is very polished, there's a way to show up in that meeting and at that table, right?
Yeah.
That's like, this is how you show up, and there's a way to speak and a way to sit and a way to present yourself. And let's say you're supposed to sit there all day, so you can start to see, like, the tension that you're holding physically because of what the psychological norm is, or the social norm. Yeah, they're really tied together.
Okay, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that makes total sense to me. And I suppose I have a question around this. There is a question of, can we get our needs met through this group? And, like, I suppose where I'm going with this is the answer always yes, or is it or does it depend on what that group is and how you fit in with that group?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
And it's why it's really important to evaluate the culture of the group.
Yes.
And the culture of you. What are the culture norms that I need? And each group does have its own tolerance of, and if it's a group that has agreed either implicitly or explicitly that they are going to ignore certain needs. So it might be an unconscious agreement, or it might be one that they've, like, turned into a policy.
Yeah.
We need to know, we can't get our needs met everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens? What happens then? Like, what's the result?
Well, internally, the result is that we suppress our needs.
Okay.
And that becomes stress or trauma. And we have to figure out a way to live with that, which is, really painful. And if it's not going to be painful, it's going to be numbing. And so, which are both really destructive, because numb mammals that are on autopilot, are super unsafe. They're not noticing what's happening within the group or around the group. So they're surprised by things, and they're really reactive. They do really destructive things.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's a lot of people that are operating in groups that are not right for them, or the group doesn't even know that they have an underlying culture issue there's an implicit agreement that we all ignore needs, or we don't negotiate needs in our group. We don't know how to do that, because that's a skill. Learning how to do that, how to identify your own needs and take care of yourself daily, all day, actually listening to yourself in that way. And this is really what my work is about, is getting back to some basics. This is like, we don't have a skills course throughout our lives to learn these things. So and then the other piece is, how do we talk about that with people and communicate our needs, and then figure out how to negotiate them in the group. If you hang out with a herd of horses, which I do in my life because I live here with a herd, and you watch them, or dogs, I have a lot of dogs, and you watch, they're constantly communicating to each other about the group needs and individual needs. They're cueing to each other all the time. And they just have this beautiful feedback system, and it flows, and the need is expressed and it's attended to. There's conflict, but they make the adjustments, move through them, and then move on. And that's what allows them to have ease. And so they would never waste energy on infighting more than they have to in a moment, because they're going to need that energy to survive.
Yeah.
We're the same.
Yeah. There's so many parallels. So many parallels.
So many parallels. Well, we are herd animals, and we just have created these lives where we waste energy. And it's not a mammal survival tactic to waste energy. It's like your energy in, energy out. It's a very basic formula. And so if we're holding pressure and tension and, you know, worrying about safety, that's all energy that our system is using. And so if you watch the herd, when something changes in it, like I've added new members to my herd, or I've had two baby horses here, and the dynamics have to change, the roles have to change, and the herd has to make adjustments. And they're so efficient at making those changes. They're like change management experts.
Okay.
And they make those adjustments. And there is a little bit more, there's more feedback going on. It's a little more dynamic for a little while, and then it's over. They've settled in. Yeah. So, but they really commit to that process.
Yeah. And I think, like, bringing it back to the workplace, I'd love to understand more on your thoughts. You mentioned about oftentimes we don't know what our needs are, we suppress our needs. I'd love to dive into that a little bit more and help people to understand how to figure out what their needs are. Because until I did this research for my master's dissertation, if someone had asked me a few years ago, what are your needs, and specifically what are your needs at work, I probably wouldn't have even known where to start. But you certainly know when your needs are not being met because you feel frustrated in some way. So I'd love to understand from your perspective, Beth, how do people kind of get in touch with what their needs are?
So back to this concept of pressure, which is, I'm not talking about overwhelm, but just little points of, you know, pressure within us, where we tense up and get, you know, kind of bracy, and sort of like, you know, it's like getting your hackles up. And it doesn't have to be anger or frustration, but just moments where something catches our attention and doesn't sit right with us.
Okay.
You know, where we feel that in our body before our mind even makes meaning out of it. Like, what is it that I don't like here, or what am I needing? Those are happening all the time. And it can be something really small. The problem is we have so many of them that they pile up into this whole pressure overload. But it could be like, all of our meetings are too fast, or like we go too fast and I can't keep up with the pace of them, or somebody is too loud, or there's no space for me to ask a question. And so I have to hold a question, or there's nowhere in our flow of work I'm just using meetings as an example. For like, it's in this
example, I think.
Well, we have way too many of them. First of all, we don't know the purpose of a meeting. So we're just having them. And then we're just like feeding information at each other, and there's no connection. There's no humanity there. So we're like, that bores us, and, you know, we're social animals. And so feeding information at each other, you know, is very numbing. And, but like in this conversation that we're having, for instance, if this was a meeting and there's no give and take, right? Like, I'm not checking in with you where you get to have a presence here. That's a mammal need. Right.
Like that it's a two-way, like I'm checking in and you're checking in.
We're all here. And so that would be like that. And that happens in meetings all the time, where people are just talked at and it's not engaging. And so we feel kind of invisible. We have questions. There's no space to ask them. So that kind of squashes our intellectual spark. You know, we're not getting like an intellectual need met, a social need. And then there's this deeper rooted thing, which is like, I don't even think I matter here. Like, I don't have a voice. And that starts to dig into like, do I even belong? And it's like becomes an existential crisis we're not even aware is happening, which is like, I go to meetings all day and I just sit there. And so what's my purpose? And we might not know that that question is lurking, but if I work with people all the time in my consultation practice, and like that is underneath the surface, is people are sitting in all these meetings feeling invisible. And first they're bored, then they're annoyed, but then they're actually asking a deeper rooted question, which is like, is this my life? Like, why am I here? Because that's what the human mind does. That's what the human identity does. We do need to feel purposeful, and we do need to have meaning, and we need to feel like we're of service. So if we're like putting all of our poor employees in this position where they don't get to have that life force, there's no spark, and they're like sleepwalking.
Yeah. And how often does this happen in organizations that you've worked with? Like, what's the kind of, is, I suppose I'm thinking like, what is the rate? So is it that there's a couple of people maybe that are feeling this way within a wider team? Is it driven by the leadership? So many different things going on in my head right now about this.
These are great questions. I think that it's happening all the time. I think this is a universal problem. I think it's happening in our classrooms with our children and the way they're being taught.
Okay, yeah.
And it just goes down the line generationally. And
so it's kind of it's a societal thing. It's kind of how we've set things up with kind of almost an us and them, and I'm the leader and you're the follower, and I'm the teacher and you're the student.
Yeah, it's a hierarchical model. Yeah, versus like a partnership model where we all matter here.
Yeah.
And so however long that's been going on in whatever cultures. And so I don't think it's true in every culture in the world.
Yeah.
Or I look at more tribal societies that still exist, and they live much more communally and interdependently, and so everyone matters. And so if you're looking at like, if ever, anytime I've seen, like, my daughter's 11 and I look at her classrooms and like, well, if everyone has a role and everyone's roles matter, and that's something the teacher builds into the culture, then you're going to see a lot more inclusion of everyone's voice, if that's part of the culture. But I think in the workplace, and a lot of it comes down to habit and efficiency, where we're too busy. So we just skip over the relational culture piece to get through the meeting. Like, we have these awful agendas. They're like packed full, but a lot of it is just people sharing information at each other. It's not about connection.
That could have been a report.
Could have been an email.
Or,
Yeah. And that would be a better. So if we really look at how we're using meetings, it's called a meeting. Let's have an encounter.
Yeah. It's about coming together. And, past podcast guests have talked about the different types of meetings that we have, like whether it's a discussion meeting or a brainstorming, or
absolutely
we need to make a decision, and only
those
having
are good
the decision
times.
makers in the room, as opposed to try and make a decision by 10 people committee. It's like, it's just not going to happen. Now, something you mentioned earlier, Beth, was the concept of individual needs versus group needs. I'd love to drill into that a little bit more, because I've only ever really spoken about individual needs on the podcast. So I'd love to get a better understanding of kind of the group dynamics and the group needs as you see it.
Well, this is a hard thing for humans to wrap our heads around, because we are not used to needing each other as in groups.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, we have like just a total self-care crisis. So we don't even know we have individual needs. And then the other half of the problem is that we don't know how to need each other and really let other people support us and share openly about what we need, and let people show up for us, or how to actually offer support. And I don't necessarily mean emotional support. I mean, we don't know how to work together as a group. We get very self-focused, and but we are, like I've said, like social mammals that live and work and operate in groups. And we just don't know how to use the group to be able to share awareness, share roles, work collaboratively to be more efficient, or to have fun, to have more joy. We don't know how to rest and let others carry our load. And there's like a big communication gap there around, so the group dynamics that happen are often just the default, because we haven't been intentional about like, how is our group, what are the most important behaviors that we do as a group that makes our work go easier, go more like flow easier, or for us to have more, we do a better job in our individual role because we utilize each other, or we have more joy and connection because we utilize the relationships. Yeah. So again, back to meetings, it's like all we do as a group is have these meetings that we don't like.
No more meetings.
But in terms of working collaboratively, I'll give you an example, because I have a great team, and there's certain things where I will lean on my team for things like thought partnership.
Yeah.
Like I have an idea that I want to flesh out, but when I go down that road by myself, it kind of like, I get distracted. It can only go so far. I'm a one-person system.
Yeah.
And so
you need that diversity of thinking, I think.
Yeah, like I want someone to question it. And and then it's like, oh, the idea starts to come to life, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, now I need to put it into like writing. And I sit down at my computer by myself and I like fall flat again.
Yes.
And so it's like, so I have a couple of collaborators that I work with, and we'll get onto a call and like work on a document together. And you will crank that thing out in like 10 minutes, which would normally take me a couple of days of procrastinating, sitting there with a blank screen. And I mean, I'm a writer, so like I don't have a problem writing, but like working independently all the time.
Yeah.
And then just going to meetings is kind of they're extremes.
Yeah.
And so we need places to meet in the middle to do some of that work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the context of the way the world of work is going now, and the new hybrid models, and a huge focus on the ability for people to work remotely, like this is going to have a huge impact. Any thoughts on the future of work in relation to what you're talking about?
Well, I think that we can be, I think we can be really intentional about the social needs and think about, if we're going to be doing remote, are there ways for people to come together and be creative about how they do come together? Yeah. Can there be some commitment to come together for some bonding and trust building? It's really important, and it is hard to do virtually. It's not impossible, but it is harder to do. And it's really important for people to have experiences together that are three-dimensional. And so, but, and so if there's a way to negotiate that piece, like, can we come together once or twice a year and do some kind of retreat experience, or in small groups, and then, at least try to bridge that gap. But I think, it's going back to this idea of like working on things together. We can do that remotely if we just set that up. Like we have little working pods, or it's like, okay, like set up your schedule with your team where like a couple people are kind of accountability, or you're a good collaborator, a good thought partner. So once a week for a couple hours, you are working on work projects side by side, and you're live on a Zoom call and just kind of talking it through, so it's not so lonely, and you can ask each other questions. It would be like you were sharing a conference room and working on your independent projects, but bouncing things off of each other. Yeah. So like having some but it's about collaboration.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing. There's a couple of things there I think that are missing from work at the moment. And the thing that springs to mind is the thinking time. So I love this idea of a thought partner, and I'm feeling like I should head over to LinkedIn now and advertise for a thought partner that can work with me. But even, things that spring to mind for me, because I feel like there's not enough prioritization going on in work at the moment, where people are just taking all the work and accepting it and doing it, rather than thinking, right, what are the really important things? And I think having someone to bounce those ideas off, to talk through, okay, so here's what I'm thinking are the priorities. Here's what I need to focus on this week, and the rest can wait till next week, or the rest doesn't need to be done at all, whatever the case might be. But I think just having someone, and it's not a case of that's going to that's an additional hour in my week that I can't manage to carve out. It's like that's the only hour in the week that you need, because that's going to determine what you spend your rest of your hours doing. Because you need that
that's
upfront
exactly
time.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
People have shame about this though.
Yeah.
They don't, like, I talk about this with clients all the time, and they don't have anyone, like we're a one person's closed system unless we have partnership and talking things through with others. We are a one person closed system, which is not safe. And so we're very limited. We only see what we see. We only know what we know. And so there's some idea that we're supposed to be able to do that on our own. And I don't know where that came from.
That we have the answers, that we should be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
And what do you think is driving that? Like, that's kind of maybe a culture within an organization.
I think it's the hierarchy again, which is like you get to certain levels and you should know everything. And so it's somehow expressing a vulnerability if you need others. Because it is what you're saying is, I actually need you. I need you to think it through and talk it through with me. And I lived this. So I've walked every mile of this journey in my own life and work life, which I didn't know how to need others. And I don't know where, I have my own psychological story and relational story of where I believe that came from, but I also think it is cultural. Yeah. And it's like, you're afraid to tell people that you're at a certain level and you still need that kind of support and help, but we never stop needing it. Yeah. And so, but I think I think it's like, there's an expectation that as a leader, especially for leadership, if you keep climbing that ladder, that you should be providing that to others rather than needing it. Yeah. But that's not the case. It's, we never stop needing it.
It's really interesting that you say that, because as you were kind of talking about the other issues, in my mind, I'm thinking of people who are a little bit more junior in an organization. I'm not picturing a leader in my head, and I'm probably thinking, oh, well, the leader has everything figured out already. But it's great. It's really refreshing to hear that that's not necessarily the case. And
it's never the case. I've never seen it be that way. And most of the really successful leaders that I work with do have thought partners. And they have people in their team that they've identified. They may have a chief of staff role, and they're using that person in that way. Yeah. And so that person is, and then that person is going and gathering information to give to the leader to like flesh out what to focus on. And so they have a partner in that. Yeah. And, but I think what happens is you have a lot of leaders who don't do that. Yeah. Or people believe they're doing it on their own. So junior people, if the leader isn't talking about that and teaching it, then it's not being mentored and role modeled. Yes. So if they're doing it, they're doing it secretly, or they're not really doing it at all. Yeah. Yeah. But we learn generationally. Yeah. And so, and we learn how to take care of ourselves by watching our elders take care of themselves. So we have to show people what we're doing. So I'm really transparent when I'm teaching about, like, it took me a year to get my calendar the way I needed it to be so that my assistant could schedule things. Like, we worked on it together. Yeah. Like, what's the best flow of my week that allows me to do all the different things that I do? And I'll talk people through that process, and it's like all the lights go on. They're like, I just let things get scheduled. I don't have specific work times, or who do I pull into this project so that I can do my best work, or, it's very thought out around my needs and my collaborative needs. Yeah. And so if people don't know that's happening, they don't know how to create that for themselves. Yeah. So we need to be teaching it. Yeah. I love to younger approach. People who are newer in the workplace. Yeah. And I mean, I think people have a lot of shame there, and it's so unnecessary, because we just aren't showing showing people how to do
Yeah.
this.
And I
Yeah.
think, the role modeling is really, really important, especially in an organizational context. Beth, we've covered a lot of ground in the discussion today. Is there anything that you feel like that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share? Anything that we haven't covered specifically?
I think that just like going back to this self needs and other needs or group needs,
Yeah.
kind of that dialectic that I think it's important if we put in context that when we're talking about leadership and the definition of leadership and an expanded and perhaps updated definition of leadership, that we really are first talking about how we're leading ourselves. And so, if you are taking care of your own needs, listening to your own needs, you're leading yourself through your day and through your life with some stability. And then we're able to actually lead others, whether we're doing that in a small scale with a couple of people or an entire organization, or whether we're doing it at home and leading a family or a friend group or a community action or whatever it is. But it does that. I really like to think about leadership first and foremost as, how am I taking care of my own needs?
Yeah.
And how am I leading myself? And that the idea of leadership is of leading others is first pointing, like helping them see their own needs and helping them identify how to get those needs met. And so, yes, we might have an intention and a vision, and we're setting direction and pace, and like those are all those things are happening. Those are all the actions. But right underneath that, I have to make sure that I'm taking care of myself so I can do those things stably, and I'm checking in with my people so that they have their needs met and we're doing it together. So I think we've overcomplicated a lot of the leadership definitions.
Yeah.
And I just go back to the animals. And then the culture piece is just about, do we take care of each other's needs, and how do we take care of each other's needs? And that's how we define our culture. So again, it's going to be more behavioral and less about values and principles and ideas. Not that those don't matter. You'd be able to name them within the behaviors. But I think, coming from my background with psychology and the animal world, I need to see leadership behaviorally, and I need to see culture behaviorally. What are the things that are actually happening?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. I mean, I talk about culture being very closely related to values, but it is in how behaviors show up, how are decisions made, how do you decide what to do, how do you decide who to promote, and how are you behaving in the organization, and is that reflective of the values of that organization that you say you have? I mean, really, really insightful stuff today. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank
you. The question I ask everyone, the new question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what does being happier at work mean to you?
I think being happier at work is about being more connected to who we really are, like that true self, the most authentic part of you, the part of you that really lights you up, that you're able to feel that and express that at work, and that you're part of groups that know that part of you. They know it and see it, and that you're known in that way. And I think when we have those two things, that we can really show up and be fully alive and fully ourselves, and that is a known, seen part of us by others, and others allow us to really see them. I think our happiness comes from that.
I love that. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, feel free to talk about your book as well. I know it just came out quite recently.
It did.
What's the best way that people can do that?
So I wrote a book that was released 2 weeks ago. It's called The Human Herd: Awakening Our Natural Leadership. And it is available at bookstores everywhere. And my website is thecircleupexperience.com. and you can read more about my work. I do a lot of writing. So there's, my work and content gets spread out there on a few different platforms and also on my blog, and then events and courses. I do a number of virtual courses and groups. And so people I do get to work with people all over the world, which is wonderful. And I love hearing from people. So you're always welcome to reach out through the website.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed the chat. I
Thank
wasn't sure what
you.
direction it was going to take, but absolutely enjoyed it. I think it's given a really different perspective to anything that I've heard before, certainly, and really, really interesting conversation. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure.